Alright, hello everyone and welcome to the fourth part of our discussion about capital gains taxation. And gaya na sinabi ko sa previous videos, everything I'm discussing here is taken from the book of Sir Rex B. Bangawan, CPA, MBA. Yung book ay entitled Income Taxation, Laws, Principles, and Applications. In this video ay pag-uusapan natin ang special tax rules in capital gain or loss measurement. And these are the wash sales of stocks. And then the second one is tax-free exchanges. So these exchanges include exchange of stocks pursuant to a merger or consolidation and transfer of stocks resulting in corporate control. So, una nating pag-uusapan ay ang wash sale of stock. So, ano ba yung wash sale? So, as the term suggests, merong nangyayari na sale and that sale resulted to a loss on sale. So, otherwise stated, pag sinabi nating wash sale, merong sale na nangyayari and that sale resulted to a loss. But take note that yung loss on sale dito is only a theoretical loss or a feign loss or a fake loss. The question is, kailan ba mangyayari ang wash sale? So sabi dito, ang wash sale ay mangyayari kapag within 30 days before and 30 days after the day of the sale that resulted to a loss, the taxpayer acquired or entered into a contract or option to acquire the same substantially identical securities. Now, ano naman ang substantially identical securities? By the way, itong securities na tinutukoy dito under the 61-day rule would include the stocks and the bonds. Pero itong rule ng wash sale, meron siyang significance with respect to the recognition of the reportable capital losses on the domestic stocks that are directly sold to buyer. Okay, now, back to the phrase substantially identical securities. Ano bang ibig sabihin nito? For example, kung ang binenta ni taxpayer ay common stocks, dapat yung bilhin niya within the span of time, no? The span of time which is the 61-day period, dapat common stocks din. So, iba si common stocks sa preferred stocks. And then, iba din si participating preferred stocks sa non-participating preferred stocks. Ulitin ko ha. So, kung ang binenta ni taxpayer ay common stocks, dapat yung bilhin ni taxpayer within the span of time, which is the 61-day period, must also be common stocks. Kung ang binenta naman niya ay preferred stocks, specifically participating preferred stocks, so dapat yung bilhin din niya within the span of time, which is 61-day period, dapat participating preferred stocks din. And then take note that the capital losses on wash sales by non-dealers of securities are not deductible against capital gains because they are effective and realized. Okay, at this point, I know na hindi pa malinaw sa inyo itong konsepto ng wash sale of domestic stocks. So, para bigyang linaw kayo, we're going to discuss the following illustrations. So, we have the first illustration, acquisition of identical shares before a losing sale. Let me read. In 2020, Mr. Toledo had the following transactions in the shares of Talisa Incorporated, a domestic corporation. And here's the data regarding the shares. So we have on January 5, Mr. Toledo purchased 10,000 shares for 4 pesos per share. So the total cost for that is 40,000 pesos. And then on March 1, another purchase of 10,000 shares at 4 pesos and 10 centavos. That is equal to the total cost of 41,000 pesos. And then on March 18, there is a sale of 10,000 shares, and then the selling price per share is 3 pesos and 80 centavos. Another information or additional information is that Mr. Toledo uses the FIFO method in costing security transactions. Alright, so ang una nating gagawin dito is to find out if there is a capital gain or a capital loss from the sale made on March 18, 2020. So, based on the information in the table, yung 10,000 shares ay binenta for 3 pesos and 80 centavos. So, 10,000 times 3 pesos and 80 centavos. So the total selling price is 38,000 pesos. And then we're going to deduct the cost of the shares. So since Mr. Toledo here is using the FIFO method, ibig sabihin, kung ano yung una niyang binili na shares, yun din yung una niyang ibebenta. And in this case, that would be the shares purchased on January 5, 2020. So 10,000 and then the price is 4 pesos per share. So the total cost of the shares sold is 40,000 pesos. Okay, so we have selling price of 38 and cost of the shares sold is 40. So mas malaki yung cost ng shares. So that means meron tayong capital loss of 2,000 pesos. Now, here's the question. Yung 2,000 pesos ba na capital loss on the sale made on March 18, 2020, is this capital loss deductible when we're going to compute for the annual net capital gains in 2020? Yes or no? So to answer that, kailangan muna nating i-check kung meron bang wash sale na nangyayari. So ito yung timetable natin to determine if the purchase transaction is a wash sale or not. Tingnan natin ngayon itong table containing the information regarding the shares of Mr. Toledo. So, based on the information provided in the table, kailan ba nangyari yung sale na nag-result sa loss? That was on March 18, 2020. Now, check natin yung mga purchase transactions dito sa table. Of course, we will not pay attention to the purchase made on January 5 kasi ito yung shares na binenta ni Mr. Toledo on March 18, 2020. So, we'll move on to the March 1 purchase. Now, we'll count the number of days from March 1 to March 18, which is the day of the sale that resulted to a loss. Pasok ba siya sa sinasabi nating before 30 days? Obviously, pasok siya. So, therefore, etong purchase transaction on March 1, 2020 is a wash sale. Now, balikan natin etong question. So, yung 2,000 pesos ba na capital loss is deductible kung magkukompute na tayo ng annual net capital gains in 2020 considering na merong wash sale na nangyari. So, anong sagot natin? Is it a yes or a no? It's a no. Kasi sabi dito, capital losses on wash sales by non-dealers of securities are not deductible against capital gains because they are effective and realized. So, ibig sabihin, etong 2,000 pesos na capital loss, hindi siya pwedeng i-deduct when we're going to compute the annual net capital gains. So, now, ano bang gagawin natin sa 2,000 pesos na capital loss? So, i-defer natin siya tapos idadagdag natin siya sa tax basis ng replacement shares. So, ano naman yung replacement shares? Ito yung shares na binili within the 61-day period. And in this case, ito yung shares na binili on March 1, 2020. Etong 10,000 shares na binili for 4 pesos and 10 centavos for each share. So, yung total cost niya is 41,000. So, ganito yung mangyayari. So, we have the adjusted basis of the replacement shares acquired on March 1, 2020. So, the purchase price again is 41,000. Tapos, i-add natin yung sinabi kong i-defer natin na 2,000 pesos na capital loss. So, ito na yung adjusted basis ng replacement shares. 41,000 plus 2,000, that is 43,000 pesos. Alright, so let's now proceed to the next illustration. So this time, the replacement shares are less than the shares sold. Sa previous illustration, eto, ang nangyari dito was full replacement of shares. Kasi yung binenta na shares on March 18, 2020 is 10,000 shares. Tapos yung binili during the 61-day period or within the 61-day period, is also 10,000 shares. Yun yung binili on March 1, 2020. So, there was a full replacement. Kasi yung binenta is 10,000, tapos yung binili is also 10,000. Now, dito sa next illustration, yung replacement shares daw na binili are less than the shares na binenta. Okay, let's find out kung anong gagawin natin in this case. So, here's the situation. In 2020, Mr. Toledo had the following transactions in the shares of Talisa Incorporated, a domestic corporation. So, ito yung information regarding the shares of Mr. Toledo. So, on January 5, 2020, merong purchase transaction na nangyayari. So, yung binili na shares ay 10,000, tapos yung price per share is 4 pesos. So, the total cost for that is 40,000. And then, on March 1, meron uling purchase. No, yung binili is 8,000 shares at 4 pesos and 10 centavos. So, yung total cost niya ay 32,800 pesos. And then, on March 18, merong sale ng 10,000 shares at 3 pesos and 80 centavos as the selling price per share. And then, additional information, sabi dito si Mr. Toledo daw ay gumagamit ng FIFO method in costing the security transactions. So, ang una natin gagawin dito is to determine whether meron bang capital gain or capital loss yung nangyaring sale on March 18, 2020. So, we have the selling price, which is 38,000 pesos. So, how to get the 38? So, we have the 10,000 shares multiplied by the selling price per share of 3 pesos and 80 centavos. And then, we're going to less the cost of the shares sold. And since si Mr. Toledo ay gumagamit ng FIFO method, ibig sabihin nun, yung una niyang binili, yun yung una niyang ibebenta. So, that would be the purchases made on January 5. Ayan. So, we have 10,000 times 4 pesos. So, yung total cost of the shares sold is 40,000. Ito yun. So, mas malaki yung cost ng shares na binenta kaysa selling price. So, therefore, meron tayong capital loss na 2,000 pesos. Now, ang next natin gagawin is to check whether meron bang wash sale na nangyari. Kasi may ibang purchase transaction eh. So, ito yung timeline natin sa wash sale. So, kailan nangyari yung sale na nag-result to a loss? That was on March 18. Now, check natin yung mga purchase transactions ni Mr. Toledo. So, itong purchase on January 5, hindi na natin to i-consider pa kasi ito yung shares na binenta ni Mr. Toledo. So, let's move on to the next purchase. That is on March 1, 8,000 shares. The question is, pasok ba siya sa timeline? Pasok siya, di ba? That is within 30 days before the sale that resulted to a loss. So, definitely pasok. So, merong wash sale na nangyari. And take a look with the information here in the table. Kasi yung binenta was 10,000 shares. Tapos, yung binili during the 61-day period is only 8,000 shares. So, yung replacement shares na 8,000 pesos is less than the shares na binenta, which is 10,000 pesos. So, here's the question now. Is the 2,000 pesos capital loss on the sale deductible in the computation of the annual net capital gains in 2020? So, anong sagot natin? Only the portion without replacement cover is a deductible realized loss. So, that means, etong 2,000 pesos capital loss, it will be split out into deferred loss and deductible loss. Itong deferred loss, ito yung portion ng 2,000 pesos capital loss na kailangang i-defer kasi merong portion doon sa shares na binenta ang nagkaroon ng replacement. So, tingnan natin sa table. Ilan ba yung shares na binenta ni Mr. Toledo on March 18? 10,000 shares. And then, di ba, within the 61-day period, nagkaroon ng replacement but not the entirety. 8,000 lang yung purchase. So, 8,000 lang yung na-replace. Now, out of the 10,000 shares na binenta, only 8,000 ang na-replace. So, yun yung portion na gagamitin natin for the deferred loss. So, ito yung fraction niya. We have 8,000 divided by or over 10,000. And then, i-multiply natin sa total capital loss na 2,000 pesos. So, the deferred loss would be 1,600 pesos. Now, for the deductible loss, ito yung portion ng capital loss wherein pwede na siyang i-deduct kapag mag-compute tayo ng capital gains. Kasi, ito yung portion na walang replacement. 'Di ba, out of the 10,000 shares na naibenta ni Mr. Toledo, only 8,000 shares ang nagkaroon ng replacement. So, the remaining 2,000 shares, wala ng replacement, wala ng cover-up. And that means yung capital loss relating to the 2,000 shares na unreplaced or uncovered, that is already a deductible loss if you're going to compute for the capital gains in 2020. So, ito yung magiging fraction. So, we have 2,000 and then we're going to divide it with the 10,000. So, 10,000, ito yung total shares na binenta. And then multiplied by the capital loss of 2,000. So, therefore, yung deductible loss related to the 2,000 shares na unreplaced is 400 pesos. Now, let's total this too. So, we have 1,600 plus 400. So, that is equal to the total capital loss of 2,000 pesos. So, itong deferred loss na 1,600 pesos, this will be added to the tax basis of the replacement shares acquired on March 1, 2020. So, ito yung magiging tax basis ng replacement shares. So, we have the purchase price, which is 32,800. So, that is 8,000 multiplied by the purchase price per share of 4 pesos and 10 centavos. So, that is equal to 32,800. And then, as I said earlier, we are going to add the deferred loss of 1,600. So, the adjusted basis of the replacement shares is 34,400. And then, etong 400 pesos deductible loss, ito ay deductible if we're going to compute for the annual net capital gain in 2020. Another illustration, in 2020, Mr. Toledo ulit had the following transactions in the shares of the Lisay Incorporated, a domestic corporation. So, on January 5, there was a purchase transaction of 10,000 shares at 4 pesos per share. So, the total cost for that is 40,000 pesos. Another purchase was made on March 1, 10,000 shares at 4 pesos and 10 centavos per share. So, the total cost for that is 41,000. And then, lastly, on March 18, there was a sale transaction of 10,000 shares at 3 pesos and 80 centavos per share as the selling price. Now, assume that by specific identification, the 10,000 shares bought on March 1, 2020 were the same shares sold at a loss on March 18, 2020. Okay, let's compute if there is any capital gain or capital loss in the sale. So, we have the selling price first. So, magkano ba yung binenta niya? 10,000 shares at 3 pesos and 80 centavos. So, 10,000 times 3 pesos and 80 centavos. So, the total selling price is 38,000 pesos. And then, we're going to less the cost of the shares sold. Ano ba sabi dito sa assumption? Ang ginamit ni Mr. Toledo ay specific identification. So, that means na pinpoint niya na yung shares na binenta niya, which is the 10,000 shares na binenta niya, ito yung shares na binili niya on March 1, 2020. So, tingnan natin yung March 1, 2020 niya. 10,000 shares, tapos yung acquisition cost or yung acquisition price was 4 pesos and 10 centavos. So, the total cost of the shares sold is 41,000. So, 38,000 minus 41,000. So, merong capital loss of 3,000 pesos. The question is the 3,000 pesos capital loss on the sale deductible in the computation of the annual net capital gains in 2020? Okay. To answer that, we need to check if meron bang wash sale na nangyari. Ito ulit yung timeline natin sa wash sale. Kailan nangyari yung sale? That was on March 18. Tapos na pinpoint na yung binenta was the purchase the shares purchased on March 1. So, etong tingnan natin ngayon is etong purchase made on January 5. So, the sale was on March 18. Tapos, we have a purchase in January 5. Pasok ba siya sa timeline? Hindi na, 'di ba? That is more than 30 days before the day of the sale. So, that means eto transaction is not a wash sale. So, therefore, the 3,000 pesos capital loss is deductible in computing for the capital gain. Moving on to the next illustration. So, this is all about acquisition of identical shares after a losing sale. So, yung previous illustrations kanina that was focused on acquisition of identical shares before a losing sale. Ngayon naman, after a losing sale. So, here's the scenario. In 2020, Mr. Balangkayan had the following transactions in the stocks of Santa Rita Corporation, a domestic corporation. So, here's the details regarding the stocks. So, there was a purchase on January 4, 10,000 shares at 20 pesos per share. So, the total cost for that is 200,000 pesos. And then, February 28, there was a sale of 10,000 shares. The selling price per share was 18,000. So, the total selling price is 180,000. Lastly, March 4, a purchase transaction of 12,000 shares at 16 pesos per share. So, the total cost for that is 192,000 pesos. Okay, so i-determine muna natin kung meron bang capital gain or capital loss out from the sale made on February 28, 2020. So the selling price is 180,000 pesos, and then we're going to less the cost of the shares sold, which is 200,000 pesos. Now, bakit 200,000 pesos? So check natin itong information regarding the shares of Mr. Balangkayan na nasa table. So, if you guys notice, walang ibang pwedeng ibenta si Mr. Balangkayan aside from the shares that he purchased on January 4. Diba? Check out the dates. Yung sale happened on February 28. So, wala na siyang ibang pwedeng ibenta kundi yung shares na binili niya on January 4. Alright, so again, the selling price was 180,000, and then we're going to less the cost of the shares sold, which is 200,000. Mas malaki yung cost, so therefore, meron tayong capital loss of 20,000 pesos. And here's now the question. Yung 20,000 pesos ba na capital loss ay deductible if we're going to compute for the annual net capital gains in 2020? Yes or no? Bago natin yan masagot, we have to determine kung meron bang wash sale na nangyari. So, here's the timetable of the wash sale. So, yung sale na nag-result into a capital loss happened on February 28. So, tingnan natin ngayon yung purchase transactions ni Mr. Balangkayan. So, yung purchase made on January 4, of course, hindi na natin to i-consider kasi ito yung shares na binenta niya. So, let's move to the purchase made on March 4. Okay, March 4. Pasok ba siya sa timetable natin? Dito tayo sa 30 days after the day of the sale that resulted to a loss. So, count it. From February 28 to March 4. How many days? So, obviously, that pasok to sa 30 days after the day of the sale that resulted to a loss. So, that means merong wash sale na nangyari. Now, going back to our question, is the 20,000 pesos capital loss on the sale deductible in the computation of the annual net capital gains in 2020? Our answer is no, because the 20,000 pesos is a wash sale loss, and this shall be deferred and included as part of the cost of the replacement shares. And here's now our computation of the adjusted basis of the replacement shares that was acquired on March 4, 2020. So we begin with the purchase price, which is 192,000 pesos. And then, idadagdag natin yung capital loss. na i-defer natin, which is 20,000 pesos. So, the adjusted basis of the replacement shares would be 212,000 pesos. Another illustration, in 2020, Mr. Balangkayan had the following transactions in the stocks of Santa Rita Corporation, a domestic corporation. So here's now the details regarding the stocks owned by Mr. Balangkayan. So there was a purchase made on January 4, 10,000 shares at 20 pesos per share. So the total cost for that is 200,000 pesos. There was a sale made on February 28. 10,000 shares were sold at 18 pesos per share. So the total selling price for that is 180,000 pesos. And then lastly, there was a purchase made on March 4. 7,000 shares at 16 pesos per share for the total cost of 112,000 pesos. Okay, now, just like the previous illustrations, ang una nating gagawin is to determine whether there is a capital gain or a capital loss made from the sale. So the selling price is 180,000, and then of course we're going to less the cost of the share sold, which is the 200,000 pesos. O bakit 200,000 uli? That is because walang ibang shares na pwedeng ibenta si Mr. Balangkayan aside from the 200,000 worth of shares na binili niya on January 4. So, the capital loss for that is 20,000. So, bakit loss? Kasi mas malaki yung cost kaysa selling price. Now, the question is, if etong 20,000 pesos na capital loss ay deductible ba if we are going to compute for the annual net capital gains? So, before answering that question, kailangan muna nating i-check kung meron bang wash sale na nangyari. So, ito yung timetable natin to determine if meron bang wash sale o wala. So, as a review, kailan ba natin masasabi na may wash sale? Kapag within 30 days before and 30 days after the day of the sale that resulted to a loss, si taxpayer bumili ng substantially identical shares. Okay, ulitin ko ha. 30 days, within 30 days before and after the day of the sale that resulted to a loss. So, kailan nangyari yung sale that resulted to a capital loss? That was on February 28. So, check natin ang mga purchase transactions. So, hindi na natin i-consider itong purchase made on January 4 kasi ito yung shares na binenta. So, dito na tayo sa March 4 na purchase. Okay. March 4. Question is, pasok ba siya sa timeline? Pasok siya, di ba? 30 days after. Within 30 days after the day of the sale that resulted to a loss. So, pasok siya sa within 30 days after the sale that resulted to a capital loss. So, that means merong wash sale na nangyari. But take note ha, yung wash sale dito is only up to the 7,000 shares that was acquired on March 4, 2020. So, out of the 10,000 shares na binenta on February 28, only 7,000 yung nagkaroon ng replacement. And that was the shares acquired on March 4, 2020. So, yung capital loss in relation to the 7,000 shares that were sold and replaced, yun yung i-defer. But, the remaining 3,000 shares, di ba kasi yung binenta is 10,000 shares, tapos yung nagkaroon ng replacement is the 7,000. So, the 3,000 remaining shares, eto yung walang replacement. So, the capital loss in relation to the 3,000 shares na walang cover-up, ng walang replacement, that would be deductible in the computation of the capital gains. So, sa tanong na kung ang 20,000 pesos capital loss ba ay deductible, if we are going to compute for the annual net capital gains in 2020, yung sagot natin dyan is only the portion ng shares na walang replacement cover. So, ganito kasi yan. So, etong 20,000 capital loss, ito yung loss sa 10,000 shares na binenta on February 28. But, alam natin na out of the 10,000 shares na binenta, nagkaroon ng replacement up to 7,000 shares. And then, yung 3,000 shares na remaining, ito yung shares na walang replacement, walang cover-up. And that means that there is a portion of the 20,000 pesos capital loss that pertains to the 7,000 shares that were sold and subsequently replaced. And that loss or that portion of loss is going to be deferred. And then the other portion of the 20,000 pesos capital loss pertains to the 3,000 shares that were sold and not replaced. So that loss or that portion of capital loss is going to be a deductible loss. Now let's compute how much is the deferred loss and how much is the deductible loss. So we're going to develop a fraction. So we have for deferred loss, so we have 7,000 shares. So that stands for the number of shares that were sold and replaced. And then we're going to divide it with the total shares that were sold, which is 10,000. And then we're going to multiply it with the capital loss of 20,000. So the answer to that is 14,000 pesos. For deductible loss, so we have 3,000 over 10,000. So the 3,000 here refers to the shares that were sold and not replaced. And then the 10,000 is the total number of shares that were sold. And then we multiplied it with a capital loss of 20,000. So the deductible loss is 6,000 pesos. So if we're going to total this two, that is equal to 20,000 pesos capital loss. So etong deferred loss, this will be an adjustment sa tax basis sa replacement shares that were acquired on March 4, 2020. And then the 6,000 pesos, this will be deductible in the computation of the annual net capital gains in 2020. Okay, so here's now the computation for the tax basis or the adjusted tax basis of the replacement shares that were acquired on March 4. We'll start with the purchase price of the 7,000 shares made on March 4. So that is 112,000 pesos. And then we're going to add the deferred loss from the wash sale, which is 14,000 pesos. So the total adjusted basis of the shares of the replacement shares on March 4, 2020 is 126,000 pesos. Let us now move on to the third illustration, and this is all about acquisition of identical shares before and after a losing sale. In 2020, Mr. Eriga had the following transactions in the shares of Naga Corporation, a domestic corporation. And shown in the table are the information regarding the shares owned by Mr. Eriga. So on January 4, Mr. Eriga purchased 15,000 shares. The purchase price per share is 20 pesos. So the total cost or the total value is 300,000 pesos. On February 15, Mr. Eriga made another purchase of 5,000 shares at 21 pesos per share for a total value or total cost of 105,000 pesos. On February 28, there was a sale of 12,000 shares at 18 pesos per share as a selling price. So the total selling price for that is 216,000 pesos. And then on March 4, there is a purchase transaction of 3,000 shares at 16 pesos per share. So the total value or the total cost for that is 48,000 pesos. And then lastly, Mr. Eriga purchased 7,000 shares on April 1 at 14 pesos per share. So the total value or the total cost for that is 98,000 pesos. Then we have an additional information. Sabi dito, yung shares na binenta on February 28 were the shares bought on January 4, 2020. Alright, so ang una nating gagawin dito is to determine whether meron bang capital gain or capital loss from the sale transaction on February 28. So the selling price for the 12,000 shares at 18 pesos per share is 216,000 pesos. And then, we're going to less the cost of the shares sold. So, sabi sa additional information, yung shares na ibinenta on February 28, galing yun sa shares na binili on January 4. So, tingnan natin ngayon sa table kung magkano yung purchase price ng shares na binili on January 4. So, it's 20 pesos per share. Alright, so here's now the computation for the cost of the shares sold. So, we have 12,000 shares kasi 12,000 shares yung binenta on February 28. And then, we are going to multiply it by the purchase price of the shares on January 4, which is 20 pesos. So, that is equal to 240,000 pesos. So, get the difference. So, mas malaki yung cost of shares sold. So, the difference is a capital loss of 24,000 pesos. Okay, so now that we already knew how much is the capital loss, the next question would be, kung ang 24,000 pesos capital loss ba ay deductible if we are going to compute for the net capital gains in 2020. So, how to answer that? We have to check first kung meron bang wash sale na nangyari. So, ito yung timetable natin for the wash sale. So, yung wash sale again, just to remind you, the wash sale happens if within 30 days before and 30 days after the day of the sale that resulted to a loss, si taxpayer bumili uli ng substantially identical shares. Okay, kailan ba yung sale ng shares na nagkaroon ng loss? That was on February 28, 2020. Alright, so now, tingnan natin itong mga purchase transactions ni Mr. Riga. So, etong purchase transaction on January 4, hindi na natin to i-consider kasi dito galing yung shares na binenta ni Mr. Riga on February 28. So, dito tayo sa February 15. No? Nagkaroon ng purchase of 5,000 shares. So, ngayon, ang question is, pasok ba siya sa timeline ng wash sale? So, kailan nangyari yung purchase? February 15. So, that is before the sale. Kasi yung sale is on February 28. So, pasok ba? Pasok siya sa within 30 days before the day of the sale that resulted to a loss. So, definitely, again, pasok siya. Next, purchase transaction happened on March 4. So, this is after the sale. Okay. Check the dates. So, yung February 28, yun yung sale. Tapos, on March 4, ito yung purchase transaction. So, pasok ba sa timeline? Pasok siya, no? Within 30 days after the day that resulted to a loss. Okay, so pasok siya. The next purchase transaction was on April 1. Ang tanong, pasok ba siya sa timeline ng wash sale? So, the sale was on February 28, tapos etong transaction is on April 1. How many days are there? There are 32 days. So, that is more than 30 days. So, sumobra na siya. So, hindi siya pasok sa within 30 days after the day of the sale that resulted to a loss. So, hindi na siya kasali. But one thing is for sure, merong wash sale na nangyari but only up to 8,000 shares. 5,000 shares on February 15 plus the 3,000 shares on March 4. So, 8,000 shares lang. And then, ilan ba yung shares na binenta? 12,000. So, that means, ang nagkaroon ng replacement is only 8,000 shares. Tapos, yung remaining 4,000 shares, wala yung replacement. Ang tanong uli natin dito is if yung 20,000 pesos capital loss ba ay deductible if we're going to compute for the annual net capital gains in 2020. So, yung sagot natin is only yung portion na walang replacement cover or walang replacement. Yun lang yung deductible. Now, how to find out for that? Ano ba yung magiging computation? So, etong 24,000 pesos capital loss, we are going to split this into two. And to deferred loss and deductible loss. Etong deferred loss, this refers to the portion na nagkaroon ng wash sale. Etong deductible loss, ito yung tinutukoy dito sa sagot sa question natin. Ito yung portion ng shares na walang replacement, ng walang cover-up. Okay, so how to compute for the deferred loss? So we have 8,000 shares. So etong 8,000, this is the total of the shares purchased on February 15 and the shares purchased on March 4. So 5,000 on February 15 and then plus the 3,000 on March 4. Yun yung 8,000. And then we divide it with the 12,000 shares. So ito yung number of shares na binenta. And then, we are going to multiply it with a capital loss of 24,000 pesos. So, yung deferred loss natin is 16,000 pesos. For the deductible loss, it will be 4,000 shares divided by 12,000 shares. Saan galing yung 4,000 shares? Ito yung shares na walang cover-up. So, ilan ba yung shares na binenta? 12,000. Ilan yung shares na replacement? 8,000. Yun yung 5,000 plus 3,000. So, 12,000 minus 8,000, that is 4,000. And then, we divide it with the number of shares sold, which is 12,000. And then, minultiply natin sa capital loss of 24,000 pesos. So, yung deductible loss natin is 8,000 pesos. And then, if we're going to total this two, that will be equal to 24,000 pesos. Etong 16,000 pesos deferred loss, this will be added to the purchase price of the replacement shares. And since dalawa yung replacement shares natin, we have February 15 and on March 4. So, ibig sabihin, itong 16,000 pesos will be shared by the shares acquired on February 15 and March 4. So, we'll start with the February 15. So, ito yung magiging computation ng kanyang adjustment or adjusted basis. So, we'll start with the purchase price, which is 105,000. And then, we are going to add the corresponding deferred loss, which is 10,000 pesos. So, how to get the 10,000 pesos? So, we have this fraction, 5,000. So, that refers to the shares acquired on February 15. And then, we divide it with 8,000 shares. So, itong 8,000 shares, this is the total number of replacement shares. 5,000 on February 15 plus 3,000 on March 4. And then, we multiply it with the total deferred loss of 16,000. So, the answer to that is 10,000. And then, add 105,000 plus 10,000. So, that is equal to 115,000 pesos. So, ito yung adjusted basis ng replacement shares acquired on February 15, 2020. And then, for the replacement shares acquired on March 4, so we have purchase price, which is 48,000. And then, add natin yung corresponding deferred loss niya, which is 6,000. So, how to get the 6,000? We have 3,000. Ito yung shares na binili on March 4. And then, we divide it with the total number of replacement shares, which is 8,000. 5,000 from February 15. And then, 3,000 from March 4. And then, multiplied by the total amount of deferred loss of 16,000. So, the answer to that is 6,000 pesos. And then, add 48,000 plus 6,000. So, the total is 54,000 pesos. So, ito yung adjusted basis ng replacement shares acquired on March 4, 2020. And then, itong deductible loss na 8,000 pesos. This will be deducted pag mag-compute tayo ng net capital gains in 2020. Another illustration. Illustration number 4, no replacement shares in the 61-day period. So, on January 18, 2020, Mr. Mulanay bought 10,000 shares of General Luna Corporation for 100,000 pesos. On February 6, 2020, he sold the same shares for 95,000 pesos. And then on March 28, 2020, he bought 5,000 shares for 55,000 pesos. So, una natin gagawin is to find out whether meron ba ang capital gain or capital loss. So, magkano yung selling price ng shares? 95,000 pesos. And then, less the cost of the shares, magkano yung shares na binili on January 18, that is 100,000 pesos. So, since mas malaki yung cost ng shares, so merong capital loss of 5,000 pesos. Yung tanong is, etong 5,000 pesos capital loss ba ay deductible if we are going to compute for the net capital gains in 2020? So, to answer that, kailangan nating malaman muna kung meron bang wash sale na nangyari o wala. So, ito yung timetable ng wash sale. Kailan nangyari yung sale na nagkaroon ng loss? That was on February 6. And then, check natin yung purchases niya. So, etong purchases made on January 18, i-disregard natin to kasi ito yung shares na binenta ni Mr. Mulanay. Another purchase transaction is on March 28, 2020. Bumili siya ng 5,000 shares for 55,000. Okay, let's check the dates. So, remember na yung sale happened on February 6, tapos yung next purchase was on March 28. So, count the days between February 6 to March 28. This is more than 30 days. So, that means hindi siya qualified as wash sale kasi more than 30 days niya. So, dapat within 30 days. So, again, walang wash sale. So, therefore, etong 5,000 pesos is a deductible loss. So, if we're going to compute for the net capital gains, etong 5,000 pesos will be deducted because this is a realized loss. Rationale of the wash sale rule. So, bakit ba meron tayong wash sale rule? So, here's the reason. Yung wash sales rule, this is intended para i-prevent yung taxpayers from feigning temporary losses which could enable them to manipulate their reportable taxable net gain. And then, yung rule na to is applicable to dealers in securities only. Okay, so we are then discussing about the wash sale of stocks. So dito na tayo sa tax-free exchanges. And that includes exchange of stocks pursuant to a merger or consolidation and then transfer of stocks resulting in corporate control. Actually, ang ibig sabihin lang ng tax-free exchanges is that etong transactions involving exchange of stocks pursuant to a merger or consolidation and also transfer of stocks resulting in corporate control are all tax-free. Ibig sabihin, walang tax. So there's no need to compute for the capital gain or the capital loss kasi these are all tax-free.